The rooftop glittered with artificial celebration, music too loud and laughter too forced when the CEO raised his glass and praised me for a bonus that had never reached my account. I held his gaze across the crowd and replied with quiet precision that I had never received it. And in that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted from celebration to something tense and fragile. People didn't react immediately, but the silence spread like a crack through glass, subtle yet unstoppable. As executives exchanged looks, they tried to hide behind smiles and raised glasses. The CEO attempted to laugh it off with casual arrogance, insisting it must be a delay in payroll, but his voice carried the faint edge of uncertainty he couldn't quite conceal. I didn't argue or escalate the moment because public scenes rarely reveal truth. They only distract from it, and I preferred clarity over spectacle. So I set my drink aside and walked away calmly, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly realized something important might be very wrong. At home, there was no anger or panic, only focus, because I had already anticipated a situation like this long before it happened. Over the years, I had learned that trust in corporate systems should always be supported by personal verification, and I had quietly built my own record of everything that mattered. I opened my laptop and accessed a carefully organized archive of documents, emails, and financial logs that traced every milestone I had delivered and every commitment made in return. Within minutes, the pattern became undeniable. My bonus had not been delayed or misplaced. It had been deliberately redirected through internal approvals that were never meant to be questioned. The evidence was clear, structured, and undeniable, showing how funds intended for my compensation had been quietly absorbed into discretionary budgets controlled by senior executives. There were approvals, timestamps, and internal messages that revealed not confusion, but intention. A decision made with confidence that it would never be challenged. I didn't confront anyone immediately because confrontation without leverage is just noise, and I had no interest in being dismissed or ignored. Instead, I initiated a contractual clause I had written years earlier, a safeguard designed for exactly this kind of situation, one that most people had forgotten existed. The clause allowed me to protect any proprietary systems I had developed if contractual obligations were not met, and it required no approval beyond my own verification. It was precise, enforceable, and fully authorized. And once activated, it set in motion a series of controlled restrictions that would reveal the true structure of dependency within the company. The next morning, the office carried an invisible tension, the kind that appears when people sense a problem, but don't yet understand its shape. Conversations were quieter, movements more deliberate. And behind every routine interaction, there was a subtle awareness that something significant was unfolding. Legal reached out quickly, requesting a private meeting to discuss the clause I had invoked, and their tone made it clear they were beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. I entered the room prepared, not emotionally, but factually, with every document and record necessary to establish exactly what had occurred and why my actions were justified. The legal counsel reviewed the contract carefully, her confidence fading as she read the clause in full and recognized that it was both valid and enforceable. She asked if the protections had already been activated, and I confirmed calmly that they had begun at midnight, operating exactly as designed. When the CEO joined the meeting, his initial confidence quickly gave way to disbelief, as he realized the clause was not symbolic, but operational. He attempted to frame the situation as an overreaction, but the legal counsel corrected him, explaining that the protections were a direct consequence of contractual breach. What they hadn't expected was the extent of the systems tied to my work, processes, tools, and integrations that quietly supported daily operations across departments. As the protections activated, access began to shift. Not abruptly, but strategically, revealing just how much of the company's functionality depended on systems I had built. The office response evolved from confusion to concern. As small disruptions appeared, workflows slowed, approvals delayed, and systems that once operated seamlessly began requiring intervention. No one could claim the company was broken, but it was no longer efficient. And that inefficiency exposed a truth they had ignored for years. Meanwhile, I continued my work methodically, documenting everything and allowing the situation to develop without interference, because clarity requires time. Behind the scenes, I conducted a deeper audit, not just of my own compensation, but of broader financial patterns that had previously gone unquestioned. What I found confirmed my suspicions. My missing bonus was not an isolated issue, but part of a larger pattern of redirected funds and questionable approvals. Other payments had been adjusted, reclassified, or rerouted in ways that benefited individuals rather than reflecting actual performance or contractual obligations. I didn't announce these findings immediately, because timing determines impact, and premature exposure often leads to denial rather than resolution. Instead, I prepared a structured report and submitted it discreetly to the appropriate oversight channels, ensuring it would be reviewed at the highest level. By midweek, the atmosphere in the office had changed completely. The usual confidence of leadership replaced by careful conversations and closed-door meetings. Executives who once moved with certainty now avoided direct questions, and departments began quietly seeking clarity on processes they had never needed to understand before. The CEO attempted to resolve the situation privately, offering to process the payment retroactively, but the clause explicitly prevented such actions after activation. What he viewed as a solution was in fact further confirmation of breach, reinforcing the legal position that had already been established. The board became involved soon after, not out of curiosity but necessity, as the operational implications of the situation could no longer be ignored. A formal review was initiated, bringing together legal, financial, and compliance perspectives to assess both the immediate issue and its broader implications. During the meeting, the facts were presented clearly. The contract, the missing payment, the activated protections, and the supporting evidence of financial mismanagement. There was no need for dramatics or accusations because the documentation spoke with a level of clarity that left little room for interpretation. The consequences became evident quickly. Leadership decisions that had once seemed routine were now understood as negligent or intentional violations of policy. The individuals responsible could not defend their actions without contradicting documented evidence, and silence replaced argument. The board moved decisively, prioritizing stability and compliance over loyalty, and initiated immediate changes to leadership and oversight structures. The focus shifted from managing perception to correcting reality, ensuring that the company could continue operating without further risk. As for me, I presented my terms calmly and without emotion, outlining the necessary steps for resolution, including compensation, contractual penalties, and system licensing. I made it clear that my objective was not revenge, but accountability, and that resolution required recognition of both the breach and its impact. The board accepted the terms not out of generosity, but necessity, understanding that delay would only increase risk and complexity. Once agreements were formalized, the protections were lifted in a controlled manner, restoring full operational functionality without disruption. The company returned to stability, but with a different awareness. One shaped by the recognition that systems, like people, should never be taken for granted. Processes were reviewed, responsibilities redefined, and oversight strengthened to prevent similar situations in the future. I chose not to remain with the company, not because I couldn't, but because my work there had reached its natural conclusion. What I had built was complete, and the circumstances had made it clear that my value was best recognized elsewhere. In the end, nothing dramatic defined the outcome. No confrontation, no spectacle, just a quiet correction of imbalance and a clear acknowledgement of truth. And that, more than anything, was enough, because respect, once understood, doesn't need to be demanded again.